One more.
Whoever's cat just meowed got the attention of my greyhound who's in my office.
It's Blackie. Hi, Blackie. I know. You want to go see the greyhound? Hmm? No? No greyhound. Oh, okay.
Okay, so welcome to today's field trip. I'm Kelly McGinley from Audubon, Pennsylvania. We have a very special guest, Eli DePaulis, with us today. He's going to give us a tour of the Trout Run Nature Preserve, which is owned and conserved by the Appalachian Audubon Society. Eli has been a longtime member of Appalachian Audubon Society. He's the co-chair of the Conservation Committee and the Trout Run Committee, and anyone who knows Eli knows that he's a bit of a rock star in the Audubon world. He just finished up his associate's degree at Penn State Du Bois in wildlife, and he's headed off to main campus, assuming he's allowed to go. Otherwise, he'll be virtually headed off to main campus in the fall for his bachelor's in forestry. So before we get started, just a reminder that we do have field trips almost every Wednesday. Today's our last one for the month of May. We're going to take a little break next week. But in June, we have some exciting field trips coming your way as we head into the summertime. We've got a birding by ear field trip, a butterflies for birders field trip that was just presented, I think, to the Lehigh Valley chapter. Might have to check myself on that one. The Hawk Watch field trip, which will be presented by the folks in the Allegheny Plateau chapter on the Allegheny front, and a really special treat, an acrylics in nature field trip. So totally different than what we've had, but really exciting stuff. So keep an eye on the events page here, which is pa.audubon.org/events. You don't have to turn yourself upside down like this but you can find easily the schedule of events there. And if you miss anything or forget to click through, you can just check the recordings at pa.audubon.org, click on the chapters, and you'll be able to scroll down and see the link to the virtual field trips page. It has all of the recordings from when we started these way back in April. Just reminders, I know you guys are all old pros at Zoom by now, but just a couple reminders. All of your microphones will be muted from this point until we get to the Q&A at the end. If you have a question though, Eli has his chat box open on his end, so feel free to type a question in and he'll answer them as he goes through the field trip. You can turn off your computer. Your camera. This can be especially helpful if you feel like your video is getting a little bit glitchy. If you turn off your camera in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, that'll help save some bandwidth there. And if you have any other questions and you want to wait till the end, we'll have some time for you to ask Eli directly. So with that, I am going to pass over controls to Eli. Sharing.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Oh, yep. Share screen. I'll get this situated quick. All right. All right, is my screen visible? All right, I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yep, you're all
good. All right, thank you for coming out today and tuning in and taking the time out of your busy or not so busy schedules to listen to me speak. Thank you to Kelly for moderating today's program, and thank you to Pennsylvania Audubon for hosting this lecture series, and Appalachian Audubon be a part of this lecture series by talking about the Trout Run Nature Preserve. Today, I hope to give you a fairly good tour of the Trout Run Nature Preserve, albeit virtually, by talking about how trout is managed for the wildlife by Appalachian Audubon Society. And if you have any questions throughout this presentation, I will try to get my chat box up and working as much as possible so I can answer them along the way. All right.
Eli, there you go.
All right. Did my screen, did my slide change? Slide. Hold on for a sec, folks. So this first story about Audubon, we were founded in 1971 by a group of concerned citizens looking to do environmental work in South Central Pennsylvania. That moved to the form of a chapter of the National Audubon Society, Appalachian Audubon, that now serves parts of Dauphin, Perry, and York counties. Appalachian Audubon is dedicated to conserving birds, wildlife, and their habitats through education, land conservation, and stewardship. That land conservation and stewardship portion of our mission is I'm going to be talking to you all about today, and it's part of the mission that's still through our ownership and management of the Trout Run Nature Preserve.
Hey, Eli, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Yeah.
Your audio's a little glitchy. Can you move your hotspot a little closer to the window again?
Okay, let me see. All right, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, that works. All right, sorry folks. Working off a hotspot here. So our chapter does a whole lot more than just manage Trout Run Nature Preserve. We host monthly programs on the third Thursday of every month at the Christ Presbyterian Church in Camp Hill. These run from September through April, and they're all free and open to the public. They start at 6:30 p.m. with a brief social time, followed by a program, lecture style, at 7 o'clock. Also, throughout the year, we offer a wide variety of educational trips and events, as well as 2 native plant sales in partnership with Diakon Wilderness Nursery, where you can stock your garden full of wonderful native plants from their greenhouses. We do all this in addition to our conservation work. I have included 2 links at the bottom of this presentation, which can also be shared later. One is to our website, appalachianaudubon.org, and the other is to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Appalachian Audubon. I've also included my contact information if you have any questions later on. Say you have a burning question that you forgot to ask and want to ask it a day or 2 later, that's perfectly fine. You can just email me. So now to the reason that we're all gathered here today. The Trout Run Nature Preserve is a 17-acre property located in Upper Allen Township, Cumberland County, just outside of the town of Mechanicsburg. The property initially rose to prominence after the first breeding bird atlas effort, when a pair of state-threatened sedge wrens were found nesting in the wetland section of the property. At the time the wrens were discovered, the property was under the ownership of a development company that was looking to build houses just about anywhere they could get away with it, up to and including areas very near where the sedge wrens were nesting. Basically anything that wasn't a floodplain or completely hydric soil. So obviously that couldn't go forward. So then after some back and forth between the development company, Appalachian Audubon, and I believe the Game Commission, the development company transferred the wetland portion of Trout Run to Appalachian Audubon for the purpose of creating a nature preserve mostly to protect the sedge wrens. That was done in 1995 for the sum of $1. Interestingly enough, shortly after the sedge wrens, or after Trout Run Nature Preserve was founded, the sedge wrens abandoned Trout Run, and we have not seen a sedge wren in Trout Run since the late 1990s. Nonetheless, Trout Run Nature Preserve remains today, and Appalachian Audubon remains committed to conserving Trout Run for the benefit of native plants and wildlife. All right. My slide's not shifting. Hold on, folks. Let me just make an adjustment here quick. I'm going to close out the chat box just momentarily. All right, back in gear. So what makes Trout Run unique is not necessarily the fact that it is exceptionally rich with bird life. While Trout Run does offer good birding throughout the year, it is by no means exceptional when compared to other sites throughout south central Pennsylvania. What makes it really exceptional, though, is the fact that it is a natural area that lies atop limestone bedrock. And this limestone geology makes Trout Run a particularly fertile ecosystem with unique properties that I will talk about throughout this presentation. Additionally, many of these areas with limestone geology, sometimes called karst geology, have been developed for agriculture and industry throughout Pennsylvania. This development pressure has made limestone ecosystems quite rare in the state, and Trout Run offers the Appalachian Audubon Society an opportunity to manage a limestone ecosystem, in this case a limestone stream and cold water emergent wetland complex, the opportunity to manage that for the benefit of wildlife. Some of Trout Run's limestone features, the most apparent one is the large cold water emergent wetland complex and stream, from which springs arise directly from this limestone bedrock. And that occurs through the middle section of Trout Run, which you can see a photo of there, one of the stream sections. And this emergent wetland is then surrounded by a wet meadow type ecosystem that is periodically inundated and naturally treeless, but is still, although it's drier, it is still dominated by obligate and facultative wetland plant species. Additionally, because the limestone bedrock is able to neutralize acids, the soils and waters of Trout Run are fairly neutral in pH. And this offers protection against acid precipitation at Trout Run, a problem that has plagued a lot of other parts of Pennsylvania, especially in western Pennsylvania, areas around the Allegheny National Forest, from acid deposition coming off the Ohio Valley. Trout Run's been not completely immune, but fairly well off given the conditions that have occurred in other parts of the state. The complex hydrology that underlays Trout Run as well has contributed to the formation of sinkholes on an adjoining section of Trout Run that's owned by the Creekstone Manor Homeowners Association, but it is still open to public access and often considered a part of Trout Run that you can go and visit. They're pretty cool, often filled with various reptiles, or not reptiles, amphibians rather, that are a lot of fun for kids if you want to go take them over there. Pretty cool. Additionally, there are some small rock outcroppings in another section of Trout Run, which form a limestone bluff, limestone prairie type area, which we're actively restoring to take invasive species off of that area and get it back to what it would have looked like before centuries of intensive grazing and urban development pressures. What's probably most interesting for the birders in the audience, which I'm assuming is most people, given that you're here for an Audubon lecture, is that limestone streams, including Trout Run, have fairly intermittent stream flow. So periodically, areas of the wetland will become inundated, and then the water will recede, and sometimes the creek just disappears completely. It's just a feature of this the limestone, these karst geology areas. It's really complex hydrology. And when that happens, it exposes mudflat areas that are frequented by wading birds such as great egrets and great blue herons, as well as shorebirds like greater and lesser yellowlegs, spotted and solitary sandpiper, and killdeer. So I'm not that great at identifying shorebirds, and that's what I've found. So I'm sure if a lot of you were to go out there, many of you which are very good birders, you'd find a whole lot more, just because of the nature of identifying shorebirds. Either way, really cool. Additionally, the fertile waters of Trout Run, these constantly fairly cool waters, also a really great substrate on the stream itself. It's rocky gravel, fuels large insect hatches, which are taken advantage of by our aerial insectivores, especially swallows and flycatchers. And I almost guarantee you, if you went out to Trout Run right now, don't leave right now, but if you went out there, you would see lots and lots of swallows, barn swallows, tree swallows, maybe a purple martin or two, diving over Trout Run, catching insects. And since the water is coming directly out of these underground springs, it is fairly cool, not cold or warm, around 55 degrees. And if you go out to Trout Run in the middle of the winter, I've been out there when it's 18 degrees, and that creek's still going to be running ice-free and flowing. And that's a major attraction for songbirds in the winter, and larger birds too. A lot of the larger birds are eating the smaller birds, red-shouldered hawks, barred owls, great-horned owls, red tails, coopers, sharpshins. Your full complement of raptors will be out there. But yeah, that's a pretty cool feature. And as with any good cold water emergent or any good cold water ecosystem, we have natural trout reproduction. In this case, brown trout, which are not native to Pennsylvania. They're native to limestone systems in Europe, but they have been introduced and are an indicator of a healthy limestone ecosystem. There you can see a quick image looking down through the emergent wetland area, and in the middle you can see the pond where a lot of our largest springs arise. That's directly across from a viewing deck that you can access. It's about 75 yards or so to the side of this image. And additionally, muskrat holes go off of that pond, which create these nice side channels that are utilized by a wide variety of wildlife and really create a neat, diverse, complex ecosystem. And looking at Trout Run from a landscape scale, it really is unique because a lot of these same properties, this clean water, good soils, make limestone areas very valuable for human development, particularly agriculture. And over the past few centuries, with European settlement, a lot of these areas have been developed, particularly for cattle grazing and wetland areas, which could not be utilized for row crop production. But then also in the areas adjoining these wetland areas, we've had a lot of row crop production, corn, soybeans, etc. And again, in recent years, we've seen an increase in suburban development from city areas such as Harrisburg, this urban sprawl. So between all these different pressures, these limestone ecosystems, which are the most fertile areas, most productive areas of land, have become increasingly developed. And I really find it interesting that most of the areas that we're managing for wildlife are the least productive areas of the state, the mountainous regions of the state, which are have nowhere near the value of the areas that we've colonized and are utilizing. So Trout Run, again, it offers this unique opportunity to manage a high quality area, high quality ecosystem for wildlife. And if we just dive into the soils a little bit more, I'm not a soil scientist or soil science major, but what I do know is that if you look at the pHs of these soils, they're anywhere between 5.5 and 7, which is absolutely ideal for plant growth as well. This is just off of the Web Soil Survey. If any of you are familiar with the old soils books, they would come for each county, and they're these large white books. All that information is now online. It can be accessed really easily. But these neutral pH soils are excellent for plant growth because as in the neutral pH range, plants are able to uptake the maximum amount of nutrients possible. Think of it as like a garden. What happens when your garden becomes too acidic? Well, your plant growth is going to be hampered considerably. That's because plants are unable to uptake the nutrients that they need. So say you're a gardener, what do you do when you have exceptionally acidic soils? You dump lime in it. So these Trout Run and these limestone soils are naturally in the ideal pH range. And as a result, we have absolutely explosive plant growth. In Trout Run, there's a water plantain on the left, which is a species that I've seen in other parts of the state. I should say genus. There's multiple water plantains, but I digress. It'll grow not all that big, maybe 6 to 10 inches. Trout Run, it'll exceed a foot. There's on the right some jewelweed, Impatiens capensis. In most parts of the state where it's not this limestone geology, more acidic soils, it'll grow 3 to 5 feet maybe. Well, Trout Run, this stuff is growing over 7 feet high. I know that because I'm 6 foot and this stuff is, well over my head. And it's absolutely wonderful. And these plants make up the basis of the ecosystem upon which our native wildlife depend, and the basis of the food chain. And the famous Doug Tallamays made this quite apparent with his research on how native plants fuel native insects, which are then used by our native insectivorous songbirds. Looking at the Trout Run on a more local landscape level, you'll see that it has, for at least the past near 100 years, probably considerably longer, probably since the late 1700s, although I don't really have aerial images dating back to that time for obvious reasons. The earliest aerial image that we have is 1937, and that over the past few years it's become increasingly pressed by these development pressures and is now really this green oasis amid an ever urbanizing sea of houses and intensive agriculture. Additionally, Trout Run offers water quality benefits. If you were to go to Trout Run, what you'll notice is that all these stormwater drains from the developments on both sides of Trout Run drain directly into the Trout Run wetland. There are actually ditches that were dug straight from the developments under the roads right into Trout Run. So when we get precipitation, the stormwater goes directly into Trout Run, where luckily, because it's a wetland there, it can be filtered out of any given pollutants, reduces the velocity of that water going down through, hopefully helps some water percolate in to the groundwater, but nonetheless has some great stormwater mitigation value. And Trout Run is part of the Yellow Breeches Creek Watershed, which is an exceptional value stream that supports a lot of recreation, a lot of recreational boating in the lower reaches of the Yellow Breeches stream or creek, and a lot of fishing value towards the upper end. It's a Class A trout stream as you get up above the Huntsdale area of the Yellow Breeches, and still maintains wild trout reproduction all the way down through to nearly where Trout Run intersects with the Yellow Breeches. So as Appalachian Audubon, we understand and value Trout Run for more than just its wildlife habitat potential, but also for the role it plays in the watershed. So now that I've explained to you how Trout Run is this wonderful, valuable piece of land for wildlife as well as stormwater retention and benefits, you're probably wondering, how has Appalachian Audubon taken this piece of land and maximized its potential for these purposes? How are we managing Trout Run? And really, there's been 3 distinct phases of managing Trout Run, if you will, from the time that we acquired the property in 1995 until today. And I like to call these the passive management era, the hands-off management era, and now the more active management era. So during passive management, which is when we acquired the preserve at first in 1995, I'd like to identify as there was really a 3-pronged approach to managing Trout Run. The first was trails. We had an extensive trail network going through Trout Run that allowed people to access the preserve and to see just how wonderful Trout Run really is. To really appreciate its beauty and from that, hopefully care about the preserve and not trash it, if you will. We also had a strong native plantings program led by a lot of our members in Appalachian Audubon. And during this period, there were extensive native plant gardens throughout sections of Trout Run, as well as a rigorous planting program for both conifers and some deciduous trees including white pine and river birch, which the stands that are the areas where these were planted still occur today, and they're now some of our most dominant trees in the preserve. So it had this native planting program combined with trails that was really topped off by a good community outreach program. We have photos from back when the preserve was first started of large wetland festivals, or I should say wetland festivals is one that Wildwood Park there in Harrisburg has really taken off with. We had similar events at Trout Run. There are even photos, which I no longer have in my possession, of large tents that were set up with speakers coming in. There were walks throughout the wetland and such to really engage the community and further get them to care about the preserve. And during this period, Trout Run looked really nice. From all the images that I've seen of it, it was largely native plant dominated. That time there would have been right around the time when Sedge Wrens ended up abandoning it, but they were still, at some of that period, they would have still been there. Nice preserve. There were some Eagle Scout projects that were conducted there to further enhance the preserve and make it a valuable asset to the community. That then kind of slipped into a different mindset around 2008, 2009, where the mindset on the board as well as among membership was more that the best way to manage a nature preserve is to just be hands-off. Kind of let nature take its course. Don't disturb the site, don't do trails, don't do vegetation management. And I can find essentially no records that really anything was done during this period from 2009 to 2015, other than the bare minimum. I believe there was some maintenance of drainage ditches that were going into the Trout Run, more at the request of the township than anything, but it's really just this hands-off approach. Don't do anything. And that dominated till about 2015. But I'll just share some pictures. So by 2015, we had quite a few issues occurring at Trout Run, foremost of which was extensive lawn waste dumping from the surrounding developments. There are piles of lawn clippings and just, I couldn't believe all the stuff that people had in their yards that they would just dump into Trout Run. And you can see here are some piles of that occurring. And these were all through the preserve, as well as invasive species just starting to run rampant. There was absolutely no control of them. On the left, you can see cow parsley, which is a exotic biennial from native to eastern west, native throughout Europe. There's garlic mustard, which many of us are probably familiar with, another exotic biennial that really takes over these, these forest understories. I believe it also has some alleliopathic tendencies, which is secreting chemicals that suppress other plant growth. It's almost like a herbicide, if you will, that the plant secretes. These guys were just running rampant. There was no invasive species management at all. No one going out there and pulling garlic mustard or trying to prevent these species from getting introduced. One big shout out that I'd like to make in this presentation is to Joan Watroba from the PA Bluebird Society. During this entire period of hands-off management, she was still maintaining a cavity nesting birds trail around the preserve, which was quite successful, which has been quite successful. She still continues to maintain it to this day, out there checking bluebird boxes, ensuring that cavity nesting birds have a place to go and rear their young. So hats off to her. She was a major force in doing this, and she was also an advocate for getting out of this hands-off management era. So then again, around 2016, there was kind of another shift in thought on Trout Run. And instead of having this hands-off approach, we as a chapter sort of stepped back and went, man, this really isn't working. The preserve is getting overrun with invasive plants. There's no access to the preserve within any kind of trail network. It just was really kind of becoming a bit of a mess. And we even have Google reviews that people left us during this time period that really expressed that same sentiment, that Appalachian Audubon should really take a more active role in managing the Trout Run Nature Preserve and try to clean it up a bit and improve the quality of Trout Run for native wildlife while also maintaining some kind of public access. So we had developed what amounts to a three-prong approach, although it really wasn't called this at the time. I'm just saying this from retrospect. What it amounted to was a three-prong approach of public access, education and signage, and then vegetation management to try to rehabilitate Trout Run and bring it back from that era of hands-off management. So I'm going to talk about each of these in their own slides. Public access, our first move was to reopen a viewing deck, which you can see the photograph of there on the screen. And that was done in 2016 by a group of volunteers from a local Boy Scout troop and a few chapter volunteers. We got that done relatively quickly. In 2017, we reopened a small trail on the Stumpstown Road side of the preserve, which is quite a nice trail now. And what we decided at the time was that we didn't want to rebuild the full existing trail network because it went through some areas that were largely dominated by native wetland plants, and we decided that we didn't want to disturb those areas. So we decided to go for a partial rebuild of the trail through areas where we thought would be not too impactful to native plants and wildlife. And then 2017, we did a full trail reopening as well as a small picnic area, again, in areas that were not of tremendous value for native plants and wildlife, where we thought we could have a minimal impact and also get people in there to appreciate the true beauty of this preserve and the uniqueness of its ecosystems. So here's just a few photographs of what we did before and after. Those are before photos taken around 2015, maybe early 2016, but before we did any work there. So we just did some revamping. We revamped the educational kiosk. Still looking to do more work on that. There's the viewing deck trail that we opened up. And all these are kind of small changes that we made that don't have any real substantial impact to the quality of the ecosystem, but get people to appreciate them, or appreciate the trout run. There you can see the viewing deck before and after. A couple members from Appalachian Audubon there in the photograph on the right, including Jane Webster and Kathy Kuchar, who were absolutely instrumental in ensuring that this trout run restoration project can move forward. Hats off to them for backing the effort and being able to put the money where their mouth was on the board and yeah, really give the funding to the trout run restoration effort that it really needed. We've also started some educational programming, albeit limited. One of our favorite ways to educate people about Trout Run is by getting them involved in the restoration work and other conservation work that we're doing. This is especially true for tree planting. We love to have volunteers come out to Trout Run and plant trees during the spring and fall to help beef up the riparian buffer around the wetland area. And those have been very successful. And as the scouts are working, scouts and also other groups, we had a group from, what was it, Delta Dental came out and helped plant trees around the preserve. So, you know, great work on their part, and they go away with an appreciation for Trout Run. Also done some programs for the Appalachian Audubon members, taking them out and showing the project. They're at the top left, or top right actually of your screen. You can see a quick tour that we were doing for the board of directors, looking at some Canarygrass management work in the preserve, and doing this in combination with educational signage. And you can see just some of the improvements that we made. This was particularly true in the early days of the restoration project in 2017, We installed anti-dumping signs and talked to neighbors about why we really don't want lawn waste being disposed of into Trout Run, both from the perspective of introducing invasive plants and also that we don't want any chemicals that might be on the lawn waste coming into Trout Run, particularly chemicals that we don't know what are. And we'll talk about that here later, how we do use some herbicides as a strategic tool for invasive species management. Oh, we're getting to that now. So the third prong of our restoration approach is to do vegetation management. And this falls under two categories. The first is invasive plant removal. Second is native plant introduction. As I previously talked, there was some native plant introduction and invasive plant removal that occurred during the passive management era, right when we first acquired the preserve, but that was all left go. There wasn't any vegetation management for a good 8 years or so between 2008 and 2016 when we started the restoration project. So during that period, a lot of things that could have been kept in check through just some basic efforts, manual pooling mostly, species like garlic mustard really took off and became major issues throughout the preserve. Also true for the reed canarygrass, which has been choking out the wetland section of the preserve now for quite a few years. But we are fighting back. Then native plant introduction, again, trying to start that up again. So why do we want to go in and remove invasive plants? Well, it's simply a matter of they don't support the beneficial insects that native plants do. This has been pioneered by Doug Talame down at the University of Delaware. I highly recommend going to see him speak if you get the chance. Appalachian Audubon and Manatee Conservancy partnered back in 2017 to bring him in to speak. And that was a great event, very just wonderful event. And if your organizations that you work with have an opportunity to do it as well, I'd recommend doing it. And what you'll see is that, compared to native plants, invasive species do not support the same insect diversity. And a lot of our native birds are insectivorous. Even birds that we don't really think about as being insectivorous, like chickadees, cardinals, are insectivorous during the spring, summer, and fall when they need that insect protein to rear broods and grow their young. You don't, unless you're a goldfinch, you're not going to be growing your young on seeds. They also form monocultures that push out native plants, and we really like to maximize our biodiversity within Trout Run. I like to think of it as a football team. A good native ecosystem, a good ecosystem dominated by native plants has 3 strings, and they're all your best players. If you take and compare that to an ecosystem that's been highly degraded by invasive plants, you have your football team is 1 string, that string is your 3rd string, and they're all the worst players that you can think of. So that's why we want to go in and remove invasive plants. And we do this by using herbicides as a strategic tool in invasive species management, conducting manual control where possible, and it is possible in some sections of Trout Run, although it would have been a lot easier if we would have had a manual control program from the start. And a lot of the reason that we have to use herbicides is the fact that we had this hands-off approach for many years. And also we like to minimize soil disturbance when and wherever possible, especially when we're looking to place trails and other recreational infrastructure. Because oftentimes when you disturb the soil at a site and remove whatever plant community was already in existence there, you're opening it up to invasion by plant invasion. Throughout this process, we like to practice integrated pest management, which is the idea that we use all the tools at our disposal to manage whatever species that we want to get rid of or minimize the presence of. Our first goal is to prevent invasive species from becoming established. We've done this by installing anti-dumping signs throughout the preserve to try to keep lawn waste, especially from coming in. A lot of times invasive species will be hiding out in that, talking to neighbors and forming a good relationship with them, so that way they understand where we're coming from and they recognize the harm that dumping lawn waste does. So that's our prevention program, really in a nutshell. And then say an invasive species does become established somewhere in Trout Run. Our first goal is going to be to contain that species. This is really true for our stiltgrass program, where we only have a few small populations of stiltgrass scattered around Trout Run. We like to try and keep that from getting to new parts within Trout Run by cleaning our equipment, trying to keep our boots as clean as we can when we're working out there. And then say that stiltgrass does become established somewhere else in the Trout Run, or we get some other random invasive plant that comes in, we're going to want to try to pull it out and do manual control. A lot of times this works well on honeysuckle because they have super shallow root systems. You can just run around ripping them out, especially for the young ones. And biocontrol is something that we really don't do a lot of, although we do have mile-a-minute weevils within Trout Run, which do a pretty good job of keeping mile-a-minute from becoming an absolute disaster, though it is bad. And then at last resort, we want to start looking at our chemical control options. These are your herbicides. And when we do that, we want to look at the safety record of the chemical, how fast does it break down in the environment, and what are the unintended consequences of applying that product. Does the means out, basically it's a balancing act there. And we try to use herbicides as responsibly as possible. And one of our favorite things to do is combine both mechanical control and chemical control. And here you can see honeysuckle removal efforts that we have had at Trout Run over the past years, where we go in and we remove the top of the plant, the top of the honeysuckle bush, move it out of the way, and then simply treat the stump with herbicide, so that way we aren't broadcasting chemicals far and wide. And this is practical for some species, particularly exotic shrubs, although it's not practical for all. So we've tried to do as much of that as possible. We're practicing that integrated pest management. And then we have to monitor our results. We don't want to be wasting our time doing ineffective control measures when we could be looking at other methods. We don't want to be stuck in the same groove we don't want to be stuck in that same groove and not be looking to other ways of controlling invasive species. So we monitor our results. We've been doing this the past 2 years with drone flights over Trout Run, performed by Ben Mummert, who also works for the Central Pennsylvania Conservancy. He goes through and flies a really nice drone, and we can see individual clumps of invasive plants, and then we can even stitch those images together to form a cohesive picture, a model of Trout Run Nature Preserve that we can then use to go and plot our next attack, if you will, plot our strategy and see what's working and see what isn't working. And there you can see our Reed Canarygrass program is really evident on this. On the left is 2018, or 2019, right's 2020. This was just done this past Saturday. You can see areas where we've done herbicide applications and removed Reed Canarygrass. And if you zoom in further, you can see other areas where we've removed invasive plants and have seen results. And from these, I can tell what species have come in to replace those invasive plants as well. It's quite impressive. And here's just a quick montage of some of our drone imagery. Up here in the upper left-hand corner, you can see Japanese honeysuckle that has come in to this area. And the browned out areas here are areas where I did an herbicide application on this Japanese honeysuckle. But you can see, I didn't get it all. It's right here hiding out, and we have to go deal with that now. So you might not have seen this from the ground, that you have this giant patch of Japanese honeysuckle that's still up here in the trees, but by using this drone imagery, we can do that. Here you can see different patches where we've treated or not treated, and different years that we've done invasive plant treatments. And you can see patches of native plants coming back in. Those are crow's foot, which is a nice, quick native plant cover. And you can just see, and if you're like my girlfriend, she just likes to look at the drone imagery and see the ducks that we catch floating around. in the images. It's the first thing she wanted to see, interestingly enough. You can also see the impact of our trails, and we can even look at our trucks from up high. So pretty cool. So just a few results that we've had from our invasive species removal program. One of the plants that I really like to see come back into Trout Run after we do invasive plant removal is milkweed. We've had it on enough occasions when we've gone in and removed winter annuals and exotic biennials. Milkweed's a really tough plant, comes in quickly on disturbed soils. It's naturally, it's a native plant that does that in these early successional areas. We've had quite a good response out of them, which of course, again, is the host plant for our monarch butterflies, which is a species of concern in Pennsylvania. Here's an area where we did a treatment on, I think this is again, just a variety of invasives, chickweed, garlic mustard, cow parsley, just a whole variety. And after 2 treatment rounds in this case, we can see that we've shifted the bounce of the plant community away from those invasive species, which are basically just biological pollution, towards native plants such as jewelweed, pokeweed. There's also some gray dogwood hiding out in there, which you can't really see, but is in there, trust me. You know, shifting that bounce. Here's an area where we did mechanical chemical control combo with cut stump herbicide treatments on this Japanese barberry. Those are the large stumps that you see kind of in the middle. And by doing that, removing that Japanese barberry, we've opened up growing space for our pokeweed and jewelweed, as well as there's some river oats in there. I think there's some red oaks that are coming up. But basically, we're again shifting the bounce away from these junk invasive plant species, which have not co-evolved with our native insects or birds over thousands of years or millions of years like our native plants have. We're getting rid of those, putting native plants on the ground, which are more beneficial to wildlife. And we're doing it in a responsible manner that does not result in any kind of, I shouldn't say any kind of adverse effect. There's obviously some trade-offs, but overall it's been very successful. And here you can see cow parsley. It's again, just terrible invasive species. Goes in and chokes out basically any native plant you can find. And here, pardon the fact that they're at different angles, but it's the same area. You'll see that after just 2 rounds of a selective herbicide treatment, and we do this in March when only the cow parsley has emerged, we treat the rosettes very carefully. And we've shifted this bounce in this area away from that cow parsley towards both river oats, which we also seeded in there, and jewelweed, as well as I think there's dogwood coming up in there too. But really, really stunning success on that front in this area. Our biggest problem though is reed canarygrass, which is a Eurasian cool season grass. It does have some biotypes that are native to North America, but almost all the reed canarygrass you're going to see in Pennsylvania is exotic. It was initially introduced for cattle grazing purposes, and that's most likely how it got into Trout Run, was the fact that Trout Run was used as a cattle pasture at one time before Appalachian Audubon owned it. Most likely got in that way, but it's this really densely growing exotic grass that pushes out any native plants that may be growing in there, all except for some jewelweed that happens to make it every year. But we realize as a chapter that this is a problem, and we can't have the majority of our own nature preserve being dominated by these exotic grasses that have very little to offer wildlife. Now, when compared to our native warm season grasses, our bunch grasses, these guys emerge earlier, they grow tighter, they have this really thick rhizome system that chokes out any native, and also don't retain the same structure that our native bunch grasses do in the winter. So these guys lay flat, almost like a carpet in the winter, whereas our native bunch grasses and other native plants retain their structure and offer shelter to wildlife. And I ended that window just because it was becoming a bit of an issue on my end. So I will answer your questions as soon as I go through here. So what we did is we obtained a permit from DEP and the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission to do a real light herbicide application on this. This is following standard protocol that's been developed by professionals in natural resource management. So we went and did this light herbicide application, and we're able to pull the grass back or knock it back for a year. And when we did this, we didn't completely know what to expect, but we've been pleasantly surprised that while some of this reed canarygrass has come back, which we've then retreated with even lighter dose spot treatments, we have seen a tremendous response from our native wetland plants. Anything from Allegheny monkey flower to mints and straw color flat sedge has just come back in force into these areas. And what's really cool is that these plants also, they retain their structure through the winter, so they offer some kind of shelter to wildlife in those areas, as well as a food source. In the case of the flowering plants, a nectar source, and the sedges, they offer a tremendous food source in addition to being great for a great cover plant. There you can see some blue vervain, Verbena hustata, some Eleochris or spike rush, then some smartweed, polyagnum, albeit I don't know exactly what species it is. Force in Trout Run, as we expected, in combination with black willows, forming thickets along the edge of the stream, these willows have probably been kept down by years of intensive cattle grazing and then by invasive species, in this case the reed canarygrass. And here's our 1 year photo since treatment on one of the reed canarygrass areas, and you can see it's pretty barren. But if you were to go out there right now and take a look, you'll see just the ground is completely covered with, maybe a few millimeter high plants or maybe a few inch high native plants that are coming back in. And I was just out there this past Saturday with someone who knows a whole lot more about botany than me, and it seems to be looking quite good on the native plant front. And these are species that, again, are more valuable to wildlife. It's not the biological pollution that is reed canarygrass. So in addition to doing invasive species management, we also have done native plant reintroduction and protection. This is especially true for our woody plant species, which have been kept down by excessive deer browse, because there is no hunting yet, at least at Trout Run. The deer population is absolutely through the roof. So if we want to try to beef up our riparian buffer, we have to do tree tubes to protect them from getting completely browsed to the ground. Additionally, other areas, again, need a kickstart after invasive plant removal. All those photographs that I showed you of the reed canarygrass management area were done via, or just seeds that came out of the seed bank. They're occurring there before the reed canarygrass ever became established. And again, we like to get youth involved with the plantings, and we also have done browse cages around some of our shrubs, because shrubs grow in a way that's not too conducive to a small linear tube. So we're trying to protect them as well as our trees. And it's been a real learning curve with native plantings. We've had quite a bit of success and failure. And what we found is that if we don't do some kind of post-planting treatment, like installing tree tubes or doing selective herbicide applications in areas where we've established these native plants, they almost always fail. Even deer-resistant species like spice bush, eastern red cedar, and pawpaw are almost completely decimated in the high browse conditions that Trout Run has with the high deer population. But now that we're starting to do some of these post-planting treatments, our plantings have become quite a bit more successful. active management has been quite successful at Trout Run, and I hope that this has given you a Trout Run itself and how it's come a long ways, and what Trout Run looks like. So that way, when all this coronavirus lockdown stuff ends, you'll be super excited to go out there and check it out for yourself. With that, there is the link to our website. You can also Google us, just Appalachian Audubon. And there's my email, my 2 emails. You can contact either one of them, elidepaulis1@gmail.com or eqd5248@psu.edu. And with that, I'll take any questions. Let me go access the chat bar. All right.
Eli, you've got a question about mile a minute and control of that.
Yes. So mile a minute, it's this annual vine from this annual Asiatic vine. There is a biocontrol that has been released for mile a minute, although it more or less just slightly hampers its growth. It's called mile a minute weevil. Yeah, you can pull it out fairly easily, although I recommend that you have gloves on because it does have some prickles on it. Other than that, your herbicide options, you can do pre-emergent herbicides like sulfomethron methyl, although that can be messed up fairly easily, and I only recommend that for areas where you're just newly established populations of mile a minute, where you still have a largely native plant dominated area and you just want to completely obliterate any mile a minute in that area. So that would be my recommendation for that. At Trout Run, we just do some herbicide applications, particularly of glyphosate products on mile a minute to control it in some areas, but largely we don't do a whole lot about it other than trying to shade it out. Mile a minute is like sun, and if you can get trees to grow over top of it, we've done some tree planting around areas with mile a minute and pre-tubed around it, and just pre-tubed and then sprayed around the tube to keep mile a minute from going up the tube, and that's been somewhat successful. And yeah, as far as recommended herbicides, we use a lot of glyphosate products. Just with any herbicide, follow the label and wear any protective equipment that is necessary. Oh yeah, and Trout Run is now open. You can go walk the trail and be around. Just don't gather in large groups. Oh, with bishop's flower, I'd have to check. I'd have to get back to you on that. I haven't dealt with it. Karen Atwood, is cow parsley the plant that grows along Stumpstown Road near the bridge? Yes, that is it. Yeah, and we have done some spraying of that, particularly in March when it's still in its rosette phase, and we can go in and treat it with a foliar herbicide application without damaging any native plants that might be coming up later. So yeah, and it's still super aggressive, so we have had some issues. But yeah, Arlene T, please reach out to me afterwards, and I'll try to get back to you with whatever recommendations possible I can find. I can even talk to some friends. All right, is there something good? Is there something we see? If we see something good or worrisome, who should we contact? Yeah, you can contact myself with that contact information, or you can reach out to us through our website. We have a comment intake filter there. So yeah, feel free to reach out with any comments on that. Yeah, we have a intake area on our website. All right.
One other thought, Eli, you mentioned Doug Tallamy a lot. So he has a lot of books. The recently most famous one was Bringing Nature Home, which was a great one to start with, especially if you're doing any kind of planting. And then he's doing a ton of speaking just about everywhere right now, because his new book just came out in February-ish.
Yeah.
Nature's Best Hope. So I've seen at least half a dozen speaking webinars go through my inbox just in the past couple of weeks. They do sell out fast though. So
yeah,
they're free.
Definitely check him out. He's really he's on the leading edge of invasive plant and native plant ecology. He's just a great speaker, highly recommend it. Okay, so we have another question. What are ways that we, the community members, can help at Trout Run? One of the ways that you can really help is, I know it's pretty basic, but if you can pick up litter along the sides of Trout Run, that'd be great. We get a lot of trash that blows in. And if you just want to go around with gloves and a bag, you can go ahead and do that. As well as stay tuned to our website. We occasionally have work days at Trout Run that you can come out and help at. So look at our website and our newsletter for those. Probably nothing coming up very soon, but at least where we have a large group of people out. We've continued to do our natural resource stewardship work through the pandemic, but in a very limited sense with 1 or 2 people because of the fact that a lot of our work is time sensitive. Right now, we're not doing any large group work. Stay tuned to our website.
Well, Eli, thank you so much. Any last questions before we let Eli get back to virtual school? All right, well, special thanks to Eli. He put this together so quickly, and barely an hour went by between when I asked if they were interested in doing this, and he said, absolutely, what day? It's fantastic. Appalachian Audubon Society, another great one if you're in the Cumberland, Dauphin, Perry, and a smidge of York area. They're your local chapter, so be sure to check them out, appalachianaudubon.org. But big thanks, find your emojis. Big thanks for Eli for today. Thank you so much. That was terrific.
Thank you folks for tuning in. I hope to see you out at Trout Run sometime.
And for the rest of you, enjoy your week. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks, so stay tuned for an invitation for our next field trip in June.